all. Bills can win it here. White puts it down. The kick is on the way, and it is good. And the Bills have won it. The Bills have won it. The Bills have won it. They win it 41-38. Incredible. What a comeback by the Bills.
Jacksonville's perfect record on the line right here.
They put in Williams as the fullback, and he scores a touchdown, the 12th year defensive tackle.
And the fans are all over the field. Incredible. This place is pandemonium.
Welcome to another episode of Disguise Coverage, part of the Cover One Sports Network. I am Anthony. I am your host here on Disguise Coverage. Find Disguise Coverage on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, almost anywhere and everywhere that you find other podcasts, you can find Disguise Coverage. While you're there finding Disguise Coverage, please rate and review and subscribe to the pod. It is tremendously helpful. And while you're there doing that with Disguise Coverage, feel free to check out all of the other quality content that Cover One offers. We've got the Cover One podcast with Greg and Aaron. We've got the Huff podcast with Sterling, another Anthony, and Eric. Just tremendous quality content over at the Cover One Sports Network, breaking down the Buffalo Bills and touching on a lot of topics in the NFL as a whole. Feel free to check all that out. Subscribe to all those pods and to Cover One as a whole. Find me, Anthony, on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro 2 underscores ANT. I'm pretty active on the old Twitter. And now that that little lead in is done, this episode, the Buffalo Bills playoffs push. Bills have a bye week this week. And coming out of that bye week, the Buffalo Bills have 6 games. And I know they're regular season games, but for me, and for all intents and purposes, in my eyes, those games are an extension of the playoffs. And the reason those games are an extension of the playoffs is because we're going to get into the AFC East, as we know, with Miami breathing down the Bills' neck. It's still close. It's not guaranteed. It's not a given that the Bills are going to win the AFC East. And the AFC conference as a whole is extremely jumbled. Even though the Steelers are undefeated at the 1 seed and the Chiefs only have 1 loss at the 2, seeds 3 through 9 right now in the AFC are extremely jumbled. It is a mess in the AFC. And to add on top of that, a lot of the teams that are seeded 1st through 9th right now, they're all going to get a piece of each other as we go through the rest of this regular season. There's a lot of matchups of all these teams playing each other and getting looks, and there's going to be a lot of telltale games and signs of who is going to be what as this season progresses. And the Bills are one of those teams. And before we get into that, just get it out of the way. I'm not wearing glasses this week. I'm also not wearing a hat this week. I don't want to say that those things are due to the Bills losing to the Cardinals last week, but I'm not going to say they're not due to those things. Horrible loss against the Cardinals, gut-wrenching, not as soul-crushing and heartbreaking as other losses in Bills history, but definitely not an ideal way to lose, especially to see the Bills drive and come back and get the win, and the throw by Allen and the catch by Diggs, and it's not good. I'm still not over it. I don't think I'm ever going to get over it. I'm still legitimately bothered by it. I haven't gone back and watched the game completely. I've watched plays here and there in series and gone through some of the all-22, but it's still eating away at me. I don't want to watch it. And it was a bad loss, but it's not terrible for the entire year. I mean, would I like to go into the bye 8-2 instead of 7-3? Oh, most definitely. I don't think anyone would want to have a loss that they don't have to have. But it's not the end-all, be-all. And I think we're going to see some positive things from the Bills coming out of that bye week. As of this moment right now, heading into the bye, the Buffalo Bills sit at 7-3. They are currently the 3rd seed in the AFC behind the Steelers, who are first at 9-0. The Chiefs at number 2, who are 8-1. The Buffalo Bills are 4-0 in their division, the AFC East. They are 5-2 in the conference, which bodes well for potential tiebreaker scenarios as we go down the road heading into the playoffs. For those of you who don't know, the tiebreaker scenarios, when you're out of division with someone else in the conference, the first tiebreaker is head-to-head matchup. If you haven't played that team head-to-head, the next thing you go off of is conference record. Below that is win-loss percentage in common games played, minimum of 4. After that, it's strength of victory. After that, it's strength of schedule. And so the Bills are in decent position when it comes to where they are in the division. Again, being undefeated in the division so far, knock on wood, being 5-2 in the conference, that bodes well for things as we continue to go forward. So the Bills are not in a terrible place. I think there's a little bit of doom and gloom after losing to the Cardinals because of the way in which the Bills lost, and especially coming off of the high of beating the Seahawks the week before. And it was like, well, if we can beat Seattle, and Seattle's a better team than Arizona, which I think that was a pretty common thought, why can't the Bills beat the Cardinals? But I think if you told most people a couple weeks ago that going into the bye week, the Bills are going to be 7-3, most people would have thought, okay, we lost to the Seahawks and we beat the Cardinals. But when you beat the Seahawks and then lose to the Cards, it takes a little bit of the air out of the balloon. But the Bills are still in good position. 7-3, 4-0 in the division, 5-2 in the conference. And as this comment says right here, I'm guessing that means worried about Miami. That's a good comment there from Milan PSG. Oh, two interesting European soccer clubs right there. We're going to get into that in a little bit when it comes to the Miami Dolphins and the Buffalo Bills, talking about the AFC East, talking about the AFC conference as a whole. Just to begin with things in that conference, again, Pittsburgh at the number 1, KC at the 2. Just with how the schedule lines up for the rest of the year for both the Steelers and the Chiefs, it looks like the Steelers are going to get one of those top 2 seeds, maybe even the top. The Chiefs have a harder strength of schedule as we go down. The Chiefs are at the Raiders this week, which I think is going to be an easy win for the Chiefs. The Raiders' entire defense, for the most part, has COVID and is going to miss the game. Plus, the Chiefs are extremely motivated after losing to the Raiders earlier in the year. But then their schedule, it gets a little bit interesting. They are at Tampa Bay, home against Denver, at Miami, at New Orleans, home against the Falcons, home against the Chargers. Really interesting games when they play the Buccaneers and they play the Saints. I'm intrigued to see what happens with the Chiefs. But if you look at the Steelers, pretty much a cakewalk schedule minus a couple games. They're at the Jags this week. They're home to the Ravens next Thursday night on Thanksgiving. They're home to the Washington football team, away at the Bills, away at the Bengals, home to the Colts, and home to the Cleveland Browns. Not the easiest, but also not the most difficult of schedules for the Steelers. I imagine the Steelers are going to get one of the top 2 seeds, and I would imagine the Chiefs are also going to get one of the top 2 seeds as well. I believe the Kansas City Chiefs are the best football team in the NFL. I don't think that's a tremendously hot-takey statement. I don't think that's something that's come out of nowhere. I think when you look at the Chiefs' offense and you look at the Chiefs' defense, they are the most complete, and taking their special teams into account as well, they're the most complete football team in the NFL. The deficiencies that they have are decently to strongly covered up by the strengths that they have. And they have Patrick Mahomes, who probably is going to win the MVP every single year that he's in the NFL. It's ridiculous, the numbers that he's putting up. And it's just he's an afterthought. And the numbers that he puts up are just kind of overlooked because his greatness is already established. They have weaponry everywhere. They have good coaching. They're a very good football team. The Steelers are an interesting team, but they're a good football team. I don't think they're as good as their record states. I'm going to continue to say that. I really hope that doesn't come back to bite me in the butt as the Steelers play the Bills on that Sunday night football game. But I think the Steelers, based on the quality of team that they have and the schedule that they have, they're going to end up with one of those top 2 seeds. Everything else after that, as I mentioned in the lead into this episode, is a jumbled mess. Right now in the rest of the AFC, you've got the Bills in the 3rd seed, 7-3. From there, all the way to the 9th seed in the AFC, every single team is sitting on 3 losses. The Bills are, again, at the 3 seed. They've got 3 losses. The Colts are at the 4 seed. They've got 3 losses. The Raiders are sitting at 5, 3 losses. Miami, 3 losses. The Ravens, 3 losses. Cleveland and Tennessee are at the outside looking in right now, but they're all sitting at 3 losses as well. To add to the jumbled mix and mess that is the AFC here, I mentioned it a little bit. there's a lot of teams that are all going to play each other. This week, the Titans play the Ravens. Then they play the Colts next week. They also play the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland has games against Baltimore and also a game remaining against Pittsburgh. The Ravens have a light schedule, but again, they play Cleveland, they play Tennessee, they play Pittsburgh. The Chiefs play the Dolphins. The Dolphins also play the Raiders. There is a lot of opportunity for moving and shaking going on in this conference, and we're going to see it starting with this week with Tennessee and Baltimore. Oh, I want to hit this comment real quick. I have a feeling Ben won't finish the season. He got old real quick, plus injuries are catching up to him. He had that knee injury against the Cowboys. I will never doubt Big Ben. I've seen him get hurt and look like he's going to be done for a game or done for the year, and he just manages to always come back, always come back, always come back. And even so, the key to that team this year is the defense and some of the supporting cast weaponry around Ben. I will say that if Roethlisberger is out for the Steelers, it makes a big difference for that team. But I don't know if we can guarantee or count on someone being out. If he's in there, I'm taking everything at face value as of now. So I'm going to assume and believe that he's going to finish the year and he's going to quarterback them into the playoffs. And with that, they're still a dangerous team. But I like where your head's at. And I understand where your head is at. So again, you've got teams 1 through 9 right now in the AFC. They're going to see a lot of action against each other. They're going to see a lot of potential matchups, and that includes the Bills. And I say all that to say this, and I mentioned it at the beginning, the Bills are in playoff mode coming out of the bye because of the current seeding and structure in the AFC and how jumbled everything is and how close everyone is to one another. A couple losses here or there, especially if they're in conference. The Bills cannot afford to have an in-conference loss. So the Chargers game, the Steelers game, the Dolphins game, if it means something come week 17, which we're going to get into, in the Patriots game, are more important than any NFC clash that we have going down the rest of the year. Those in-conference games will affect not only your win-loss record, but again, tiebreakers come playoff seeding. I don't care if there are no fans allowed in the stands for a playoff game. I would much rather have a home playoff game than an away playoff game, especially with how some of the teams, depending on what state they play in, are allowed to have fans at games. So I'll take a empty home game that's basically a neutral site versus going to play on the road against a team that might have some kind of fan interaction or fans in attendance. I would much rather have that. The AFC, again, jumbled. A loss here or there could be the difference between being the 3 seed or being the 4 seed, which isn't the end of the world, or in the Buffalo Bills case, with how Miami has done and how they continue to win, a loss here or there could be the difference between the Bills winning the division and being the 3 or the 4 seed and not winning the division and coming out and finishing in a wild card spot anywhere from 7, 6, or 5. And I don't want that. I don't think anybody wants that. One, from the practicality aspect of being a division winner. I want to be a division winner. I want the AFC East. I want that crown. If not even just for the home game, just for the emotional attachment to it. I'm not one to use emotion and heart to outplay or overshadow practicality and the actual on-field representation and meaning behind it. But I want to be the AFC East champs, and I don't want Miami to get that. This was the year. This was supposed to be the Bills' year. Miami, I understand that they're a good team, but this should be the Bills' division. This should be the year that the Pats get knocked off, and it looks like that they will, knock on wood, and it should be the Bills to do it. They're the best team in that division. It's their year. It should be their year. I want the AFC East. But Miami is not going to make it easy. I know we've heard a lot of talk about Miami, and there's been a lot of coverage for them in the media outlets and what Tua's done and what the defense has done. And they're a good team. I said it last year coming out of the season, what they did and what Brian Flores did, he got a lot out of a roster that was meant to only get a little. Brian Flores is a good coach. I think Tua is a very, 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 very good quarterback, even in just what he's done in the small sample size as a rookie. I think he's performing well. But long-term, I thought he was going to be a really good quarterback. I know Burrow looked good coming out of college, but Tua's legit. Devontae Parker's legit. They've got good pieces on the offense, on the defense, and in the coaching staff. They're a good team. They're a quality team, and they're not going to go away. The Miami Dolphins schedule the rest of the year. They are at the Denver Broncos this week. They are at the New York Jets the week after that. They are home to the Bengals, home to the Chiefs, home to the Pats, away at the Raiders, and then away at the Buffalo Bills in week 17. Do not be surprised and do not get worried and flustered and fret if after these next 3 weeks the Miami Dolphins are sitting there at 9-3. I think the Dolphins beat the Broncos this week, especially with Drew Lock having multiple injuries. He may not play, and even if he does, he's banged up. Don't be surprised if Miami beats the Broncos this week and move to 7-3. Don't be surprised if they beat the Jets the week after and move to 8-3. Don't be surprised if they beat the Bengals the week after that and are sitting there at 9-3 after 12 games. I will say it's possible for Cincinnati to beat the Dolphins. They beat Tennessee. Joe Burrow's pretty cool and pretty fun to watch, and they're a better team than their record shows. But I would still say Miami has a pretty solid chance of coming out of these next 3 weeks with a W in each week. So do not be surprised if Miami is sitting there at 9-3. Do not be surprised if all the media outlets, and I'm talking social media, I'm talking TV, I'm talking about a multitude of outlets and coverage stations are talking about the Miami Dolphins instead of talking about the Buffalo Bills. The Miami Dolphins are the sexier team in the AFC East. They play in Miami. They've got a quarterback that was awesome in college, who was a Heisman candidate, who's got national championships under his belt, who's got tons of records and wins under his belt. He went to Alabama. He played for Nick Saban. And that's the story right now. Everybody's gushing about Tua. And also, because the expectations weren't as high for Miami as they were for the Bills this year, every time the Dolphins rack up a win, it's that much more impressive and that much more fun and that much more of a story to all these media outlets and sports coverage reporters and people and writers, because it's a story that's going to draw clicks. Oh, what's that? This team that you didn't think much of, all of a sudden they're good? Oh, man, what a story. Click, click, click. Sorry, I got distracted by this comment. Steve Mathis with $1.99. Doubt us just how we like it. I like that as well. I'm going to second that notion. I'm a big fan of the whole keep Buffalo a secret thing. Don't doubt us. Don't talk about us. Give that bulletin board material to show, like, look at all these people not paying attention to us. Go ahead. Talk about Miami. Talk about Miami. That's a good thought there, Steve. I like where your head is at with that. And so that's how you should take it. Exactly what Steve said. Doubt us. Just how we like it. Do not get upset when Miami wins this week, which they probably will, and the Bills sitting there on the bye. And so Monday morning, oh man, Miami 7-3, the Bills are 7-3. Is Miami the best team in the AFC East? Are the Bills falling apart? Is this Miami's division to win? Let's take a look at Miami's schedule and show how they can take the AFC East and the Bills can't. That's going to be the story on Monday and on Tuesday and on Wednesday. And it's going to continue to be that story after next week, when the Dolphins probably beat the Jets, and the week after when the Dolphins probably beat the Bengals. And that's okay. That's okay. Because even if the Dolphins are 9-3 at that point, which there's no guarantees that they will be, but they probably will be, after that they're home against the Chiefs, then they're home to the Patriots, then they're at the Raiders, and they're at the Bills. I think Miami's a good team. I don't think they're terrible. I don't think they're as great as everybody's making them out to be. I think there's some smoke and mirrors aspect to the Dolphins. But I don't think they're beating the Chiefs. I know New England hasn't looked great, but I don't think it's guaranteed that you can say the Pats are going to lose to Miami, even if it is in Miami. The Raiders, for their deficiencies and some lackluster plays and roster development, they're still a good football team. There's no guarantee that the Dolphins are going to beat them. And then it comes down to the Bills game in Week 17. I see Miami, again, in the next 3 weeks being 9-3. Very realistic and legitimate possibility. But you could also make a case that after they're 9-3, there's a chance that Miami could come out of that looking 9-7. There's a chance the Miami Dolphins could finish this year 9-7 or 10-6, however you want to put it. But do not get annoyed or worried or too fearful if Miami starts to reel off these wins these next 3 weeks and everybody and their mother starts talking about it and putting Miami up on the front page of websites and papers, and Tua's getting all the spotlight, Tua's getting all the shine. That's fine. But expect it and understand where it's coming from, because, again, Miami is the sexier team. They're the sexier pick. They're a bigger market than Buffalo. I'm sure the NFL would love to see Miami succeed and Tua lead them to a championship or division crown or playoff appearance, however you want to go through it. They're the sexier team than the Bills. The media is going to like that, and they're going to push that story. But don't get too worried about it. That being said, the Buffalo Bills cannot afford to lose any games, especially in conference, coming out of this bye week. Again, the Bills coming out, we're home against the Chargers, We're at the 49ers on Monday Night Football, home to the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday Night Football, at the Denver Broncos, then we're at the Pats on Monday night, and then home to the Miami Dolphins. In looking at this schedule for the Buffalo Bills, the remaining 6 games of this year, I don't see any game that the Bills cannot win, that they are out of. Even Pittsburgh, again, I think Pittsburgh's a good team. They got a quality defense. They're in the top of the league in a high majority of metrics, especially in sacks. They're good with DVOA. They're well coached. They have a very good mix of scheme and quality play calling, and at the same time, good players. They're a quality team. They're not 9-0 by pure fluke or pure luck or pure accident. They're a good football team. But I don't think the Bills are completely outclassed by the Steelers. That being said, the Steelers game and the Patriots game are the 2 most important games that I'm focused on coming out of the bye week. Losing to the Pats, losing to the Steelers would hurt us in the AFC conference as a whole, because, again, those conference tiebreakers when it comes to playoff seeding. But a loss to New England would kill us emotionally, or at least kill me emotionally. I think hurt a lot of fans. But it also hurt, again, in potentially staying ahead of Miami, which I know I just said, don't be shocked if Miami's 9-3. Don't be too worried. Don't get too flustered. Still, the reality of it is we can't afford to have too many losses coming out of these last 6 games with Miami breathing down our necks like that. That being said, I think the Bills beat the Chargers. I think the Bills beat the San Francisco 49ers. They're just so banged up. I feel bad for the 49ers. They're a well-coached team. They have a really quality roster. Again, they just went to the Super Bowl, and they were a 3rd and long, like 3rd and 16, 3rd and 17 away from being Super Bowl champions last year. Really good quality roster. Even though Jimmy Garoppolo isn't extremely great or a tremendous quarterback, he's still good enough to get the job done with that offense and with that team. They're a really good team, and it sucks that they've lost so many games this year due to injury, and they've lost man games and plays due to injury, and it's all been quality players that have been hurt. But that being said, the Niners game, they're still a well-coached team, but they're not going to have their studs. They're not going to have their horses. They have some. Richard Sherman should be back by then, and Warner is still a tremendous linebacker and someone who can make a difference. But that 49ers game has to be a win. Coming out of the bye, Bills got to beat the Chargers. They got to beat the 49ers. And then after that is where the schedule really starts to pick up and get interesting. Having that home game against the Steelers team that I know there's not a rivalry with the Bills. And I know it's not a team that we look at and see and think like, oh, man, it's the Steelers. Oh, man, they hate us. We hate them. But we beat them last year in a close game and in a game that, for all intents and purposes, knocked them out of the playoffs. Add in all the little extra social media things about the Bills players getting jacked up to renegade and how the Bills kind of made it their own thing and made a mockery of it, which is, you know, sacrilege to the Steelers players in the city of Pittsburgh. I think this section should be called That Being Said. I appreciate that, Alex. That is one of the things I say. That being said, I appreciate you. And I appreciate you for paying attention and commenting that. Thank you very much, sir. That's going to be a big game for the Steelers. I think they're going to be jacked up, geeked up, coming into Buffalo, prime time. I want to see what the Bills do against the Steelers, against the team that, again, going into, at that point, the Steelers maybe have a loss. They're going to beat the Jags this week. I think they beat the Ravens on Thursday night in Pittsburgh on Thanksgiving. The Steelers just look much more disciplined. They look much more cohesive. The Ravens look to be a bit all over the place. They've got, you know, some infighting when it comes to players wanting the ball more with Hollywood Brown. They've got Lamar not executing to the level that he should. They've got some injuries to that offense. They've got some inconsistencies on the defense. If Baltimore wins, I don't think it's, you know, out of this world. But the Steelers may very well come into that Buffalo Bills game, that Sunday night primetime game in Buffalo. They may very well come into that game undefeated. The Bills have the opportunity to maybe give the Steelers their first loss of the year. It's a primetime game. It's against the team that's going to be one of the either the 1 or the 2 seed in the AFC East. I'm sorry, the AFC as a whole at that point. How do the Bills show up against the Steelers? Again, against a good football team. And then they go to Denver. Bills should win that game. And then they're at New England. Another primetime game. A team that the Bills just barely got a win against earlier in the year. That's also a point I wanted to bring up too. For as ridiculous and terrible as the loss to the Cardinals was, Greg Thompson from Cover One brought this up earlier in the week, I believe on the Huff podcast when we were doing that show. For as ridiculous as the Cardinals loss was, losing on a Hail Mary, losing on a play that wasn't even really a Hail Mary, it was just a broken play that ended up being a jump ball toss to the end zone and the Bills lost. Think about how ridiculous of a win it was for the Bills against the Pats, where the Pats are basically driving the ball down the Bills' throat, definitely in field goal range, could arguably have a chance at a touchdown as well, and then Cam Newton gets the ball punched out by Zimmer, a practice squad guy who's been called up. He punches the ball out of Cam Newton's arm, and the Bills get it, and they win. For as ridiculous as the loss was to the Cardinals, we also kind of got a ridiculous win against the Pats. I think that's a game the Bills still should have won. They outplayed New England in that game, but that's a game the Bills could have come away with losing instead of winning. So it's almost a little 1-for-1. And going to New England in prime time later in the year, I know the Pats are not a good team statistically and on the field when you watch them with the eye test. I think Cam still looks deficient in certain areas, and they're still banged up. But if this team gets a bit healthier and they get on track a little bit and they start believing a little bit, maybe it's just the paranoid Bills fan or Bills analyst that still exists in me, but I will not count that game against New England late in the year as an easy win or chalk it up as an easy W. I mean, I wouldn't do that as a whole against any team in the NFL, but the Pats, they still have that mystique. They still have that ability to mess you up and do something that can screw you up. It's the same way that I'm looking at them when it comes to when they play Miami later in the year. I know Miami played them tough in the first game with Fitz, and Miami's probably the hotter team at that point. But I don't think you can look at that game and be like, well, Miami's going to beat New England. I know New England is not a good football team this year, but at the same time, with the same token, they are not a pushover. So what do the Bills look like against the Steelers? What do the Bills look like against the Pats? And then that last game against Miami, if the Bills do their job and go into that Week 17 clash against Miami with one loss on the books, I think, depending on what happens and what shakes out with the rest of the AFC, you could see the Bills rest some starters that week. The Bills may already have the AFC East locked up. They may already have their seeding or positioning locked up a little bit there. So you might not see the Bills go as hard against Miami in Week 17. So maybe Miami gets that win, and maybe that puts them into the playoffs, which is a very interesting thing to see if the Bills in Week 17 have the division locked up, their playoff seeding locked up, and if they don't play their starters and Miami gets the win and it puts Miami into the playoffs, what does that look like going forward? Because as of right now, granted, we have a lot of time left, but as of right now, the first round playoff matchup in the AFC is the Bills versus the Dolphins. The Dolphins have the 6th seed. The Bills have the 3. That's what we're looking at right now in this shape or form. And we also got some other cool matchups if it were to go down. Kansas City would play Baltimore. That would be an awesome first-round matchup. They got some bad blood, and Kansas City has always gotten the better of Baltimore. But that's an interesting thing to keep an eye out for as well. But the theme of this episode, the Buffalo Bills playoffs push, coming out of the bye week, Bills got to do their job. It's as simple as that. Don't worry about Miami. Don't worry about everything else that is a mess in the AFC when it comes to how jumbled everything is. Do your job every single week. Beat the Chargers, beat the 49ers, maybe beat the Steelers, beat the Broncos, beat the Pats, and then we'll see what happens with Miami come Week 17. What's good for the Bills and what's exciting is there's no definitive loss for the Bills coming out of the bye. I think they've got some games that are a little harder than others, a little murkier than others, but the Bills coming out of the bye week, there is no game that's like, well, that's a loss. Every single one of these games is winnable for the Buffalo Bills, even against the Steelers. Even if the Steelers come into that game undefeated and everybody and their mother is picking the Steelers to win, which will probably happen, I don't think that game is unwinnable for the Bills, especially with how the Steelers have been beaten through the air at times this year. I know they blitz a lot. They blitz a ton. They blitz over 40%. They lead the league in sacks. TJ Watt is fantastic. Minka Fitzpatrick has done a tremendous job in transforming the back end of that defense since being traded from Miami. They're a good team. They're well coached. Bud Dupree is also good. They've got a good offense, but that's not a game the Bills should lose. If they do lose, I'm not going to be surprised. But if they win, I also wouldn't be surprised either. That's a game that the Bills should be in, like they've been in every single game this year. Every game is winnable, with several games being more probable in terms of those wins. Also, as we come out of the bye week, as we go down these last 6 games in the stretch, the defense is getting healthier. I know a lot of people gave the defense flack for the points they gave up against Arizona, for giving up the jump ball to lose the game, but the defense has been better over the last several weeks. In the last 3 games, they're 6th in the NFL in sacks per game. On the year, they're 7th. Currently, they are 17th in defensive DVOA. They were at 23rd heading into the Seattle game. So they went up 6 DVOA spots after playing 2 of the top offenses in the NFL. After playing the Seahawks and the Cardinals, each a top offense in the NFL, each led by a potential MVP candidate, each with quality weaponry for their quarterback, quality pieces all along the offensive side. The Bills' defense went up 6 DVOA points, which is a very legitimate metric and a very legitimate thing that you should use to grade quality defenses when it comes to your advanced metrics. They figured some things out defensively in the last several games. We've seen different looks up front. We've seen a different utilization of A.J. Klein. We've seen Dane Jackson emerge. I wanted to bring up this comment here from Spin0481. Is Dane Jackson a better every down cornerback number 2 than Norman and Wallace? My heart really, 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 really wants to say yes. I love Dane Jackson. I love his physicality. I love his tackling. I love how good he's looked in a small sample size. His interception against the Jets was really well documented. I loved his tackle against Metcalf in the fourth quarter of the Seattle game. I love how he locked up Hop on the very first possession of the game against the Cardinals down in the red zone, one-on-one against one of the best wide receivers in the entire NFL. Dane Jackson, unproven rookie, locked up DeAndre Hopkins legitimately, and it wasn't a fluke. It was good. That being said, I don't think right now you can say he's a better every down corner 2 than Norman and Wallace. I think Wallace is still better in coverage than Dane Jackson is. He's longer in terms of like arm length and body type. I will say that Dane Jackson's a good fit in this Bills defense. I don't feel like him at the number 2 corner spot is a tremendous vulnerability, but I'm not ready to vault him over Norman or Wallace right now. And I don't think the Bills coaching staff is either. With Norman and Wallace coming back, I would imagine seeing them get more work on the outside than Dane Jackson. Where I would like to see Dane Jackson, I'd like to see him get some work in the slot, because I know Taron Johnson came up bigger last week against the Cardinals and played much better, but he's still been somewhat of a liability throughout the entire season. And with how good Dane Jackson has been, I'd like to see him potentially see more reps at nickel to potentially limit the downside that Taron Johnson has shown at different times this year. But that's a very good question. And so to go off of Spin's comment there, we've seen Dane Jackson emerge and give the Bills quality reps. We've seen players step up due to injury and COVID quarantines. We've seen a lot of wonkiness and wackiness hit the Bills defense throughout this entire year. And over the last, really since the Jets game, we've seen this Bills defense get better. Not tremendously, not massively. We haven't seen them go from, giving up 30 points a game to all of a sudden giving up less than 10. But they are making incremental improvements week after week after week. Again, the different scheme usage of A.J. Klein, being able to plug in a rookie like Dane Jackson and get quality reps out of him. We've seen a healthier Tremaine Edmonds start to somewhat get back to the form that we expected to see him play in this year, and we expected to see based on how he played the first 2 years. We've seen more flash plays from Ed Oliver. We've seen Jerry Hughes perform very, very well on the defensive line. We've seen more plays from Quentin Jefferson. We've seen A.J. Epinesa flash a little bit. And as we move forward, the Bills should have Matt Milano back for the San Francisco 49ers game. That's tremendous. I think that makes a massive difference to the Bills defense. As much as I like everybody on the Bills D as a whole, and as great as Jordan Poyer has been this year, I think when healthy and all things equal, Matt Milano is the second most important player on the Buffalo Bills defense behind Tre'Davious White. He allows the defense to do so much in terms of matchups and looks and coverage disguising, and what he can do just he transforms the defense, and he makes Tremaine Edmonds a much better player. Having Matt Milano back is going to be a massive boost for this defense. And if he's healthy, which he should be after having all this time to rest with the weeks on IR and the bye week and the week before, he should be rounding into form, rounding into health. Combined with the players coming back from COVID as we come out of the bye week, the Bills defense is getting healthier, and it was a defense that was already getting better. When you add starting caliber players to that defense, they're going to continue to get better. Again, they figured some things out defensively. Take the Seahawks game. I know the Seahawks put up 34 points in that game, but 7 of those came on that crazy busted coverage that led to the 50-yard touchdown pass from Russell Wilson, and another 7 of those points came to DK Metcalf in garbage time. So you can kind of make a case that the Bills held the Seahawks, one of the top offenses in the NFL, and they held Russell Wilson, MVP favorite at that time, to basically 20 points. And they hit him a bunch, and they sacked him 5 times, and they had 4 takeaways. They created chaos and havoc and disrupted one of the best offenses in the NFL. And even against the Cardinals, I know they gave up that fluky play at the end to lose the game. And I know they gave up over 30 total points. But when the offense went to sleep in the third quarter, it was the Bills' defense that kept them in. When it was the offense not executing in the fourth, it was the Bills' defense that was forcing 3-and-outs, getting takeaways, keeping Kaiir penned in the pocket, locked in. It was the Bills' defense that kind of kept the Bills in the game. They haven't been perfect. They haven't been great. I still think they're underachieving versus expectations that we had for them going into this year. But all is not lost for this defense. And as they continue to get healthier, this defense will continue to get better. I want to pull out this point here from Alex. Every win hasn't been glorious, but every loss hasn't been atrocious. We can match up with any team, and it seems pieces are falling into place. Hopefully, that includes the run game. That's an excellent comment from you, Alex, and I want to use that to segue into the running game because in addition to the defense getting healthier as we move forward, we also should see a healthier offensive line moving forward. We can get Mitch Morse back into the lineup along with Cody Ford and being able to see both of them play with John Feliciano. We should be able to see a stronger offensive line performance, especially when it comes to the running game. And that's what the Bills need. We need better offensive line balance. In pulling some of the numbers, seeing yards per carry in terms of the left side of the offensive line and the right side versus the offensive line. In summation, the left side good, right side bad. The yards per carry by direction. Outside the left tackle, the Bills have averaged 6.7 yards. Left tackle, 4.2. Left guard, 4.5. Right guard, 1.9. Right tackle, 2.9. If you look at explosive runs of 10 yards or more, 13 explosive runs to the left side of the line, only 3 to the right side. The right side, for as good as Darrell Williams has been, he's been very good at right tackle. But that right side has been a weakness. Getting Ford back along with Morse and having them play with Feliciano and having Dawkins at left tackle and Darrell Williams at right tackle, that is the full complement of offensive line weaponry, offensive line pieces that we would like to see the Bills have. They're going to come back into the fold. They're going to continue to get healthier. We are going to come out of this bye week stronger just in terms of health and pluggability for the pieces that we have. I also wanted to touch on the point that Alex made. I'm going to pull it up again for those watching the video stream, where he said, we can match up with any team. That's something that I wanted to pull up because it's something I have in my notes. As the Bills go towards the playoffs, again, this Buffalo Bills playoffs push, the 6 teams that they face for the rest of this year, they can match up with any of them. I don't see any of the remaining 6 games on the year being a definitive loss for the Buffalo Bills. That's the same thing come playoff time, I think, for the Bills. Would I, of course, rather match up with certain teams than others? Yes. I would much rather play the Raiders than I would the Chiefs. I would much rather play the Dolphins than I would the Steelers. There's obvious pros and cons to playing each team. There's obvious matchup differences and differentials and things you have to consider. But there is no team in the AFC that the Buffalo Bills cannot hang with. There is no team in the AFC that the Buffalo Bills cannot beat. Does that mean they should beat those teams and that it's probable that they should beat those teams? No. Do I think the Buffalo Bills can beat the Kansas City Chiefs? Yes, most definitely. Do I think there's a high probability of that happening? No. But they can. They're going to have to outscore them. They're going to have to execute better on offense. They're going to have to execute better with their defensive scheme if they were to play him again. But I don't think they're completely, holistically outclassed by the Chiefs. The Chiefs, to me, are the best team in the NFL. Again, they are the most complete team. With how good their offense is, I don't think anyone's perfect, but their offense is like a 9.5 out of 10. And their defense, which is worse than their offense, is at worst a 6 out of 10. They're a good football team. They're well coached, and they got studs everywhere on the offense. They had some cap magic in the offseason to be able to give Mahomes that extension and then still keeping Matthew and Chris Jones on the defense, who are two stud playmakers on the defense who probably don't get enough shine and recognition because all anybody ever talks about with Kansas City is their offensive pieces and Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy, which is fair because their offense is great. Reid is awesome. Bieniemy's great. But this team is a complete team in Kansas City. But I still think the Bills can beat them. I still think the Bills can go toe-to-toe with the Chiefs. I think the Bills can beat the Ravens. I think they can beat Miami, which they already have. I think they can beat the Raiders again, which they already have. I think they can beat the Browns. I think they can beat the Steelers. I think they can beat the Colts. I know we lost to the Titans, but I think we can beat the Titans. All of that being said, as is one of the themes and things that I say, there is no team the Buffalo Bills cannot beat in the AFC. Some have a lower probability of victory than others, but there is not one game that the Buffalo Bills are going to have going forward that they are definitively counted out of. And that is something that is tremendously awesome to have as a Buffalo Bills fan and as a person who watches and analyzes the Buffalo Bills. To have a team, finally, that is going to be in every game from a positive standpoint and not just like, well, they're good enough to like be in it, but they're probably not going to win it. They're good enough to lose by like 10, but they're not going to win. That's not this Bills team. This Bills team is legit. And I know the Arizona loss sucks. It's not good. It's still heartbreaking. I'm probably never going to watch it or want to talk about it ever in my life, excluding the fact that I'm talking about it right now. It's still rough. But the Bills are a good football team. And as they come out of the bye week, this Buffalo Bills playoffs push that they have, the first game against the Chargers, it's an extension of the playoffs. That seeding and that AFC East crown, where they fit in the AFC conference breakdown and where they fit in terms of who they get in the first round and where that leads into who they could play in the second round, provided they win in the wild card, all these sorts of things. Their playoffs push starts as soon as they come out of the bye week. And their playoffs push will get stronger as they continue to go towards the playoffs. As this team gets healthier, they're going to get better. As this team continues to course correct, as they have throughout the year, they're going to continue to get better. Brace yourselves, batten down the hatches, because I know the playoffs are still several weeks away. But when the Bills come out of the bye week and they're at home against the Chargers next week, next Sunday, depending on how you look at this Sunday versus next Sunday, but not this Sunday, the following Sunday, that's playoff mode. Bills can't afford a conference loss. They can't really afford any. Miami's breathing down their neck. The conference is a jumbled mess. But the Bills are in the thick of it. They're one of the top teams in the conference, and they can hold their own with anyone. And it's going to be exciting, and I'm pumped for it, and you should be pumped for it. And don't let yourself get too down from that Cardinals loss. I know it wasn't fun, but it'll be okay. And that's going to do it for this episode of Disguised Coverage. That's why the Toodles, you guys, is up on the screen. If you're watching on the video stream and watching along with me live, Toodles, you guys, means that's the end of this episode. I want to thank every single person who engaged with me on this episode, who rode with me on this episode. Thank you very much, as always. Again, I am Anthony. I'm the host here on Disguised Coverage. Please rate and review and subscribe to Disguised Coverage on whatever podcasting platform you are watching or listening on, or YouTube, whatever you're using to view this episode, listen to this episode, whatever. Rate and review and subscribe, please. And thank you. Follow me on the old Twitter. Again, the handle is pro__ant. That's pro_ANT. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all staying safe and healthy. Please continue to watch over each other and stay safe. And I will see you guys next week.